leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. Rosalind Carter. Welcome to the Guyana Dialogue. I'm your hostess, Shamisa Ali. Tonight, Amerindian development and challenges. The Guyana Dialogue is being sponsored by a coordinating council of Guyanese based in the US, UK, Canada, the Caribbean, and Guyana. Funding support is by well-known philanthropist Dave Narayan from Dave West Indian Imports. Joining me tonight are Dr. Tara and Mr. Surat Kubla. Welcome
And
this
Professor
evening.
Budu.
And Professor Budu, welcome. How are you? Professor Budu, is a pleasure.
Good to be here.
Pleasure. Tonight, we will start off our discussion about the recent affairs and issues that affected our great nation. So, Dr. Tara, I will now hand it over to you.
Yes, as almost every Guyanese know, there was mayhem perpetrated in Guyana on Tuesday. What started out as seemingly a peaceful rally turned very chaotic, very violent, where innocent people were victimized. Their stands were looted, burnt, damaged, cars damaged, and it evoked the
Unrest.
I don't know exact word, but anger is not a word, but it brings back, conjures a lot of memory of past incidents like this, like in the 60s, after the election in 1992, after the election in 2001. And it seems to be like there's a habit that some people call it a social DNA for certain groups to get involved. But before we go a bit into that, I've asked Kobe to do a presentation, then we can pick up from there, then go to Professor Budu. Go ahead.
The protest march on the east coast of Demerara. The protest march in support of Quindon Bacchus on Tuesday was nothing more than a well-orchestrated PNC-sponsored terrorism and hooliganism against Indo-Guyanese on the east coast of Demerara corridor. A prominent racist element of APNU, a member of parliament, was alleged seen at Paradise early on that morning of June 27, 2022, inciting the protesters, and many believe give directives. The individual has a televised program on the social media in the ring and have had on that program on numerous occasions two well-known racist inciters from the US, Rickford Burke and David Hines, who has always been calling for violent protests, terrorism, hooliganism to sabotage the government of Guyana. From the footage of the protests on the social media, one could have seen clearly that as the protests moved into Indo-Caribbean, Indo-Guyanese communities, primarily in Annandale and Lusignan, the marchers began to destroy and damage stalls and vehicles on the roadside and throw them on the public roadway. These were eventually set on fire. At Monrepo Market, the mayhem got worse. Indo-Guyanese businesses were targeted, looted, and set on fire. Sellers and shoppers were beaten, robbed, and the money and other valuables, and many of their produce were stolen. At the press conference this morning, the leader of the opposition and that of the PNC and APNU made the assertion that the protest was peaceful, but rogue elements of the PPP joined the march and created the mayhem, an act of terrorism on Indo-Guyanese at the Monrepo Market. Pictures of the march, however, on the social media totally dispute Mr. Norton's assertion. We vehemently condemn these actions of sabotage and terrorism on the Indo-Guyanese people.
Thank
All
you.
right.
We will now move on to Professor Budu.
I think it's right for people to march and protest. However, I understand that this march was based on misinformation. For that to further metastasize into violence against a particular race or anybody else is wrong, right? And that should not be tolerated in the society which you want to build one Guyana, right? Such violence against one particular race should not be tolerated at all, right? Regardless of what that race is, right? But people must have that right to protest. And I think that it was strange that where was the police, for example, in this? All those questions are being asked. Why was this particular violence in a particular area, right? That has to be addressed. Were there some ulterior motives into this, right? There are a lot of those questions that needs to be addressed, and I hope the government get their act together and address these issues because if Guyana is going to develop, right, we have to develop as one people and one nation and one Guyana, right? And we cannot go back to the 6 days and other times which be fair. I was in the 6 days in which violence was part of the uh, unleashed on people, and I know what happened, and I was terrorized. And I hope this shouldn't happen in Guyana in these days. Utara?
Agreed. And, just looking at
Yeah.
it, Dr. Tara, from what I remember growing up as a child, to relive those moments on Tuesday was not something as a country we want to have, right? Guyana is moving forward as one Guyana, and we want to make sure that everyone's taken care of. But there was a direct hit on a specific race of people, and it's very unfair. We can't go back to the past and change anything. What we can do is move forward. And how do we move forward and just make sure that this doesn't repeat itself? We have people who are actively looking to invest in Guyana, who are looking to move to Guyana. And when we have things like this, it doesn't look good for our country. So for me, I feel it's important for the current government to put something in place where we don't have such issues going forward. There should be, no matter who is government, there should be things in place that if people want to protest, they're welcome to do it. Everyone have a right to let their voice and their whatever they're looking to say be heard, but you can do it in a peaceful way. What we saw on Tuesday was not peaceful protest. None of it was protest according to what I saw.
Yeah. I just want to make. I know we got a couple of minutes more. Much of this talk and rationalization for the protest is based on false narratives. For example, one guy went on social media saying it's due to economic deprivation of one group. Well, that is totally wrong because what has happened, the PNC had political power for 28 years, during which time they control 80% of the economy. They own and control it. And if they didn't use that opportunity to spread the wealth equally, why they want to blame others? They had another 5 years to do it, and they have done nothing. Again, you can't blame people. Under PPP, the Africans have made greater progress than any other time in the history of Guyana. And Mr. Jagger will challenge them to an evidence-based debate to establish that. Now, the greatest way to empower people or to remove marginalization is to empower them with job, education, housing in particular. The PP government has excelled in this. They have created over 10,000 housing units. In the first year, this year, they're doing 10,400 housing units, plus over 8 separate housing schemes throughout the country. They have issued, I think, 10,000 scholarships, but the government is going to give within the 5 year period over 50,000 scholarships, giving all those people. Now, how else can you empower people other than through education, job,
How's that?
or housing? I mean, And the evidence is there, the data is there. So to claim that you're marginalized, if there's one group in Guyana that is marginalized, that's the Amerindian. Their poverty level is 70% compared to Africans whose poverty level is 31% and Indo-Guyanese 30%. So the difference in poverty level is not significant at all among the Africans and Indians. And what people are saying, the few wealthy Indians, they're using that as a comparison. But that wealth did not come from state coffers. That came from individual initiative, family pooling the resources. They take the risk. Now, what we don't hear people talk about, there are lots of Indian businesses who took the risk and they bust, they gone bankrupt, they disappear. But we don't hear about it. But a few success story, they want to make it as if they get money through some other devious means, the state fund them or something like that. So we got to look at this very carefully. Now talk about equity, distribution of wealth. There was a study done by CIA a couple of years ago, and they found no statistically significant difference in income distribution compared with Guyana, Barbados, and Trinidad. Even though they had a better distribution, it was not, again, statistically significant. So all this talking about wealth and marginalization is totally false, and they're designed really to whip up sentiments on people, appealing to the basic instinct, emotionalism, and that takes over the judgment. And I think that's a large part played in this movement. You say, however, we condemn it. We thank the government for taking very quick and decisive action. The president was on the ground. He went to Boxton, he went to Monreport, to talk to the people. And there are a few people who have written very good letters condemning it, and we hope others can come forward and do likewise. Now, that's my
We
comment, and I think we should move on because we.
Yes. All right. So we have a couple more minutes. We So if you want to continue,
15?
yeah,
Be done the 15. Just to do a closing. Professor Budu, you want to make a final comment before we leave?
I think that once there are opportunities that are available to all, right, without discrimination, right, then people need to make use of those opportunities. And you cannot blame one section of a society if they make use of opportunity and some others don't, right? We have to recognize that Guyana is a multicultural, multi-ethical society, right? And in none of these societies, right, things are exactly the same. Even in a household, people are not the same, right? So we got to expect that there's going to be some disparity, right? But for what I'm seeing so far from what the government has announced, I haven't seen any discriminatory type of opportunities. The opportunities are available to all in all sectors that the government is involved in, right? And people just have to get out there and make use of the opportunities, right? I know a lot of us come from poverty, and the way we made it is through hard work and take whatever opportunities come. People just have to do that.
great.
We cannot look. People are now shunning away from personal responsibilities. We have a personal responsibility to feed ourselves, to feed our family, right, and to protect them. We cannot exchange that personal responsibility for vote and expect the government to take over our personal responsibility. And that's clear to me. You cannot give handouts to people, right, except for case of emergency, right, and expect that people are going to come and start to take up opportunities. And people have to take personal responsibility. That's very important.
All right. Good.
Now, I am appalled with the slogan that Afro-Guyanese are marginalized. I mean, if you look at the employment structure of the country, you have about the greater proportion of Afro-Guyanese in public service, at least over 90% in the police and the military. The teaching profession, you have at least over 50%. The nursing profession, you have almost over 50%. How can Afro-Guyanese claim or the leaders of Afghanis claim that their supporters or Afghanis are marginalized. I can't understand that.
Well, not only that, the University of Guyana has 80% of its staff are Afro-Guyanese, and the majority of students are Afro-Guyanese. Now, Indo-Guyanese do not complain about that. They don't make it an issue. But somehow or the other, they continue with this race card, hoping that they can get political points or mileage out of it. But we have to leave that discussion for another time, since we have our main item is really to discuss Amerindian
Foreign
affairs.
Affairs.
So back to the host of the program.
We are awaiting the arrival of our honorable minister. So if you bear with us in just a few minutes, she will be on. So we will continue the conversation until she is here.
She's not here.
Okay. So we will get right into it.
Yeah.
She was born and spent her early childhood in the village of Santa Rosa and San Jose, Morocco, Region 1, and currently resides in Georgetown, Guyana. She's a mother of 2 children. She attended the University of Guyana, where she acquired her Bachelor of Science degree in economics and a postgraduate diploma in development studies. Her involvement in the youth, women, and political movement in Guyana started at age of 11. She obtained political and leadership education in Moscow and Cuba in the early mid to 1980s. Currently, she serves the government of Guyana in the capacity as Minister of Amerindian Affairs and is a member of the cabinet. She also served in the positions of Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism, Industry and Commerce from 2006 to 2008, and Secretary for Amerindian Affairs in the Ministry of Local Government and Regional Development from 1995 to 1997, and represent her party, the People's Progressive Party, as a member of Parliament for 30 years, from 1992 to 2022. Served as President of Rural Women's Network and Vice President of Global Water Partnership through the Caribbean. Represented Parliament of Guyana, Government of Guyana, and Women of Indigenous Rights issued both locally and internationally. She loves cricket and traveling. Please welcome the Honorable Minister of Amerindian Affairs, Pauline Rose Ann Campbell-Sukhai. Welcome. How are you? Thank you for being here this evening.
Good evening. And yes, thank you also for inviting me on The Advocate. It is a pleasure to be here so that we can share what we are doing in Guyana with respect to Amerindian development and challenges.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Dr.
All right,
Tara.
Minister, welcome, and happy I'm meeting you for the first time on social media. First of all, if you can enlighten a lot of viewers don't have an idea of the demographics of the Amerindian community, where they live, how many communities are there, what's the estimated population, and if you can give us a brief rundown on that, the demographics of the Amerindian community, which area they're spread, they're located, etc., and then we can proceed to ask follow-up questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tara. Guyana is, of course, a country that is very diverse ethnically, and the Amerindian population is mostly located in the hinterland or the interior of our country. The Amerindian population is close to about 70,000, thereabout. In the last census of 2012, that was the figure that was posited. We haven't done a most recent census as yet, so we will hold to that figure. In relation to the locations of Amerindians, they are hinterland regions that we classify as Region 1, Region 7, Region 8, and Region 9. Those are mostly populated regions with Amerindians. There are Amerindians located on the coastland, also in Region 1. Of course, Region 1 is a coastal region. Region 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 10. So Amerindians are located across our country in all the regions. With respect to how the dispersion of the nations, the Arawaks, the Caribs, and the Waraos are mostly populating the coastal areas. You can find them in Region 1 in the Northwest. In the past, we said the Northwest District, but there are subregions now, which we refer to in the Moruca subregion, in the Mabaruma subregion, and Port Kaituma subregion. On the Essequibo coast, we have Arawaks and a mix of Carib, a little bit of Carib in Mainstay, Tapakuma, Kapui, and we have about 6 others in the Pomeroon River. We also have an Amerindian village, which is titled in Region 4, that's the St. Cuthbert's Mission, and one in Region 3, Santa Mission. In Region 5, we have one also, which is Maraikabai, or we usually refer to it in the early period as St. Francis Mission. In Region 10, there are about 9 others that are located in the Berbice River. There are also Amerindian located in the Demerara River. So all the rivers, Essequibo, Berbice, Berbice River, and the Demerara River, one of the other larger river, Pomeroon River, we can find various ethnic nations of indigenous people. So we are spread across our country, and we, in terms of percentage, we say that we are about 10% of Guyana's population. But in the interior, the hinterland, we are 90% in terms of where we are located.
How many Amerindian languages and how many tribes are there now?
There are 9 Amerindian nations, and their languages also, there are 9. There is the Arawaks, the Caribs, the Waraos, the Wapishan. There is the Arikuna, the Patumuna, the Makushi, the Waiwai, and the Arikunas. Did I say that?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So we have 9 languages. Each one of the nation has their own language.
Are they any attempt made to preserve and keep these languages intact, or are they
Yes.
kinds of dying?
Yes, Dr. Tara. The Arawaks and the Waraos, who live on the coast, due to integration and assimilation over the years, they have more or less lost their languages. And our government has taken a number of initiatives over the years to address this issue. There was a Minister of Education, or a minister within the Ministry of Education, Dr. Desiree Fox. She had done some research, and she was also a linguist in her own right, and she had done some dictionaries for the Arawak language. In terms of the others, that's the Patumuna, the Arikunas, the Waiwai, the Makushi, the Wapishana, and the Patumunas, they have also dictionaries. So that is as far as we've had work done. She was the most significant researcher who have done quite a lot of work as it relates to the languages. The Ministry of Culture, Youth and Sports under Dr. Frank Anthony, he had spearheaded the projects that allowed for materials to be done in various languages in terms of stories for children, etc. Currently, our ministry has some small initiatives which we started in 2013 and 14. Then we were in 2015 not in office, but since we've returned, we again have budgeted for language revival projects. So right now we will be focusing on the languages that are, have been lost, the Arawak language. And there's been an influx of Waraos into our country due to the migration from our neighboring country, and they are integrating into the Arawaks community. So we are also going to focus a bit on getting kind of a verbal exchange in terms of sessions, so that our Arawaks, the Arawaks can learn the Arawak language and also the Warao language, so that they can communicate and work together and live together, much easier. So we are doing some initiatives. The other languages that I've not mentioned in terms of what we're doing, they are mostly not lost. We have in the Rupununi or Region 9, the Makushi language and the Wapishana language, which is spoken by children, the elders, and of course all the population. And they're very fortunate because they speak their own language, and they also speak Portuguese because they are bordering Brazil. Some of the people speak Portuguese, not 100% of every resident or villager in a village bordering the Brazilian border. And they also speak English. So they're pretty fortunate. And where the Mukushi and the Wapishana are located, they also speak each other languages. So they're pretty fortunate. What is not totally as yet being addressed is the move from having dictionaries into the written languages. That is going to be a big project, and we will be looking at that very, very soon. It is very necessary for us to preserve and to ensure that the languages of our First People is saved and is well protected. And in the future, introduce also, it's an expectation that we can introduce those languages into the school system. That will be a long-term project. It's not very simple or easy to immediately, translate everything. It will take some time for our government to address that.
Yeah, well, it's very important that you do that. It's important you preserve the language. Um, are these nations they have, the 9 nations, can they communicate in English as well?
Of course, throughout the years of our existence as a country, our school system in every single indigenous village, the English is the language that is used to tutor um, Guyanese children, and it's no different with our Amerindian population. Um, there are maybe a very few who may not understand fully the English language, but they maybe not be able to speak it fluently, but they understand it. I've traveled to most of the communities across the hinterland and across Guyana in terms of Amerindian communities, and there's hardly anyone that I've met that does not understand English or speak the English language. The church made that possible, and of course, our school system continue to tutor the younger generation um, in English language. So for us as a country, we need to ensure that the languages of our nation, our indigenous nations, are are protected, and that is what I'm saying. That we've done dictionaries, and the initiative now is to ensure that for in the process of waiting for the language to transform or transition itself into a written language, we're doing projects that will allow young people, because we're targeting the community service officers in the Amerindian villages to learn their languages. That's the languages that are at risk or have disappeared, the Arawaks and the Waraos. The Carib, we have one Carib community or one Carib village, and they speak fluently Carib. So there's no need to revive that language. And they're also taught in English too.
All right. Thank you very much for that. I'd like to ask you to make some comments on the Amerindian way of life. We're talking about housing, health, and employment. I don't know, you can deal with them separately. You know, the PP government appointed 1,972 CSOs. When the PNC get in power, they fire them. The PP got back in power, and I think they rehire them. Um, Other Amerindians may be working, logging, and probably gold mining as well. So if you want to talk about that, and give
Yes,
us some insight into the health issue, because I know the Amerindians are the most marginalized and poverty-stricken population in Guyana. The latest statistics show that over 70% of them live in poverty. So if you want to comment and
let me take you back a little bit, Dr. Tara, on in relation to Amerindian, the conditions of Amerindian and development. Um, Prior to 1992, the indigenous people of our country were highly marginalized and they live in abject poverty. There were no access mainly to primary health care, only in a few communities. And similarly, there was not secondary education opportunities for many of the younger generation. Um, Also, primary schools were not existing in all of the Amerindian villages or settlements or community that are located in the farthest regions of our country. With the advent of the PPP Civic, we have been able to transform much of what we inherited, um, abject poverty for entire country, marginalization for indigenous people and other ethnic groups. And so we have had a tremendous transformation since 92 to 2015. In every single village that is titled in the Amerindian and hinterland areas, we have basic primary health care being introduced. Every single health post is managed, and the and the services provided are done by indigenous young men and women, which we refer to as community health workers. And that's a legacy of the PPP Civic government. Before, we had the few hospitals which were we could count on our hands, in the Mabruma area, in the Maruka sub-district, in the upper reaches of, say, the quarantine. They access healthcare from the Skeldon and the quarantine area, and so we had just a few of the district hospitals at the time, and we have again a handful of basic primary health care posts across the hinterland. That has changed tremendously. We've trained many young women and men from the interior to go back to serve their people. That also obtained in the educational sector. For example, I could recall that when we came into office, the schools in almost every Amerindian villages where they were located, because even primary school was not 100% available, or Amerindians had access to 100% of primary education. Those facilities were pretty dilapidated, and it took our government the entire period from 2015 to 20, from 1992 to 2015 to really transform the educational infrastructure in the hinterland. And we are very proud of our record, because when you go across the hinterland in the early period, you will find a lot of coastlanders who were in the teaching profession, providing services, educational services to the Amerindians. Today, when you travel across the hinterland, more than 95% of the schools are managed and headed by Amerindians, and the lower level teaching staff are also Amerindians. So that is a big transformation also. And we have been able to move secondary education, which at the time we took over, there was only one secondary school. We've moved that to 13 secondary schools across the hinterland. Also, twin with dormitories that provides accommodation, provides free dietary supplies, and also we supply for scholarship students in these dormitories financial support. Other students who are not scholarship students, they may not receive the financial support as because the scholarship are incentivized by a financial support in terms of dormitory fees or dormitory allowance and uniform allowance. So across the hinterland now, we have students who can access um, in various regions secondary education. Likewise, I can draw to your attention in terms of tertiary level opportunities. Over the period of 2019 to 2015, our government made great strides to support Indigenous young students to obtain scholarship. There was a quota system in the early period to ensure that they were not left out. But as our educational system began to develop and Amerindians were afforded opportunities of education at the secondary level and were coming out with pretty good results, it became a competitive system. So Amerindians can compete also very excellently with all the other students nationally. So at the tertiary level, there's no longer a quota for Amerindians to get into university or to get an international scholarship. They compete significantly independently like any other student that are competing for entry into university. They also get scholarships through the PSM. And with the introduction of the Gold Scholarship Initiative, the Amerindians have been able to access opportunities through that project also. There is a little challenge there, however, for Indigenous students who get accepted under the Gold Scholarship. The issue of connectivity, internet connectivity, is still a limiting factor. But our government, in the past, that is between 2013 to 2015, was preparing the ground for connectivity across the hinterland, especially in the Amerindian communities. Unfortunately, that project was shelved and put on pause while we were in opposition. We're back now into government and we have reestablished the unit that deals with internet connectivity under the Office of the Prime Minister, and they have done tremendous work throughout the short period of 2020 to now. We have been able to support villages in building the facility to house all the equipment, the laptops, the batteries, and all the accessory for connectivity into these facilities that the government has funded, and through the LCDS funding that we have accrued under the LCDS strategy and our agreement with Norway, we've been able to do that. So in 2 years, we expect that our hinterland will be fully connected. But within the first phase, we're expecting at least about 100 or more communities to be connected so that they will be able to utilize the opportunities on the goal. In addition to that, they can be able to stay in their village and participate and benefit from CPC, that's the Surapota College of Education, the trained teachers, and also the University of Guyana. So we've made a lot of strides. There are internet connectivity in 72 communities. However, the bandwidth is a bit weak, but the students who are in those communities are allocated gold scholarships. So we've moved from where primary education was not accessible throughout the hinterland to where it is 100% accessible. We've obtained that sometime in 2013, 2014, and our objective at the time was to make sure that we have 100% secondary school education access to indigenous communities and students. Unfortunately, we came out of office. That was not achieved by the last government, and our government is back on track again to meet that millennium goal. It is important that we provide the same access to our hinterland young people and children as it obtains here on the coast. So, in terms of health education, I would say that it has been transformative. I could recall that when we came into office, there was a single indigenous doctor. Um, Today, we have indigenous doctors spearheading medical institutions or hospitals across the regions. And even in some of the better equipped health centers, they are now doctors placed there of indigenous ethnicity. And that is, again, a legacy which we want to talk about, we want to highlight. It took great pains for us and a lot of investment to ensure that we brought to a level the opportunities that will afford Amerindian young people and Amerindian population the chance of joining the medical field as others. We still have a far way to go, and I believe with connectivity, we will be able to expand and to ensure that investment in human resource is not only fully obtainable on the coast, but in the hinterland, that our Amerindians will have the same level of opportunities as it relates to tertiary level education, and also be participating in our development in the various professions, because we can find Amerindians today not only in politics but also in the professions, various professions, as engineers, as educators, as agriculturalists. Of course, they are also in the legal profession, in the medical profession. So I would want to stop there as it relates to where we have transformed all these opportunities to where we are, but to underscore that we are not fully where we are. We are working. It's a work in progress by our government. And we can rest assured that under the PPP civic government, the Amerindians have great hope, and we have great opportunity and assurance that they will not be left behind. We have that track record, and we will continue to deal with that. Um, if you are interested in another aspect of Amerindian development, or would you allow me to
I would like you to comment on aborting Amerindian issues land titling. I know
land
Norway allocated something like 11 million US for that purpose. So if you can give us a little rundown on that, we'll appreciate that.
Sure, I will do that. The history of land and Amerindians date back. It is referred to as time immemorial. However, in the Guyana's case, Amerindians were scattered mainly in the hinterland, lesser on the coast, and as one of the conditions for independence, when Guyana was moving towards independence, was to ensure that the Amerindians were not left as landless people. And Stephen Campbell, who was an Amerindian and who was the first Amerindian parliamentarian, had led the battle about land rights. He even visited the United Kingdom with a petition to ensure that the matter of land was not left in abeyance. Fortunately, that was part of the independence deal, and Amerindians today have land. But there's a little negative history to that too. It took Amerindians 28 years, or close to 28 years, to actually obtain land title for the lands that they were located and were utilizing. Because when we came into office in 92, um, even though there were 74 villages that were highlighted and also recorded in the 2901 Act, which speaks about land and Amerindians. We had 74 communities listed there, but those 74 communities were not secured. It took the PPP civic government to secure those lands by providing cadastral surveys and providing a certificate of title that secured the land for Amerindians. So they would have had a grant of land and an aerial description of the land, but it was the PPP civic government that forged readily ahead to demarcate and survey those areas that provided the boundaries for the Amerindians so that there would not be any encroachment. They will know exactly what they have, what and how to manage it. So first, before we allocated the 10.6 million US to continue the process, our government budgeted annually from 2005 monies to demarcate Amerindian lands. And in 2013, with the agreement of Guyana and the Kingdom of Norway and the payments for our forest services, monies were then allocated to complete that process. We had 2 years in which to develop the concept, launch the project, and to execute that project. We were able to complete quite a lot of investigations, and we were able to demarcate a number of villages. And we were again not being able to continue. We had a lapse of 5 years and a couple of months. And in 2020, when we returned, we discovered that there was hardly any work done with respect to titling or surveying the Amerindian lands. And so immediately our government, under the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs, reestablished the Amerindian Land Titling Unit, and we went full steam to ensure that we developed or we put up the work schedule that we expected to within the next 2 years or so to complete this process. We have started the work in 2021. We were able to finish 2 land titling for extension to 2 villages. And that was a record because our unit was established almost in the mid of 2021. And within the remaining months of the year, we were already on our way to titling the 2 villages, and we demarcated 5 of those villages since we've been in office. So that's a record. When you compare that record from 5 years where there was nothing done to 2 years or even less than 1 year where we've had 5 demarcation and 2 titling, that's a record set by the PPP civic government. We intend to continue to title Amerindian lands. We have 4 to 5 is the target. They mainly entail extension for lands, not necessarily titling communities now. It's all the communities have been titled, most of all, that's important. We have 2 communities outstanding to be titled. We have 3 of them. We have Rockstone, we have Parabara, and we have Eclipse Falls. Those are the only 3 communities that have to move to village status by title of grant of land. All the orders that we have on our project to title are extensions. So Amerindian lands are being extended, and that also is another positive for Amerindians. We moved from 74 Amerindian communities existing by 1992. Today we have 112 Amerindian communities, and that's a big jump. That is title lands, and now we have about 30 or more communities that have applied for extension. And this is what will be done under the project. And we will continue to demarcate Amerindian lands that are not yet demarcated. So it is a big job. It's a significant investment to secure the rights to land to our Amerindian people in our country. And in fact, I want to say that Guyana is leading the way in terms of land rights, and also in terms of the participation of our Amerindian leaders being consulted in all national development projects and strategies that is used as the strategy to move Guyana from one level to the next. Very shortly in the city, we will be having in July the 11th to the 15th of next month, 221 Amerindian leaders converging in the Artichung Conference Center to meet with His Excellency and the Cabinet. It is the first of its kind internationally, because I don't know of another country that allows for that opportunity to be availed to the indigenous people in the area or the countries where indigenous people are located. But in Guyana, we have legislated that a National Tushaus Council was established. That is a council of leaders, and that annually they should meet at least twice in every 3 years. But annually we have been meeting, and thus far the meeting is with His Excellency and the cabinet members. I don't know of that happening in any other country, but that will also take place. We have returned, and we are going to have that conference or that meeting held next month. We did not have it in 2020, neither in 2021, because of the COVID situation, the COVID pandemic. At that conference also, the leaders have full access to the leaders of this country, of all the sectors. And so they can raise, they can communicate, they can have ideas, recommendations, requests being put forward to the various sectors that will have impactful support for their development at the village level. That is also, I would say, a hallmark of the PPP civic government.
All right,
We
thank you. I want Professor Budu. Do you have any comments for the minister?
Yes, Professor Sukhai, you made some commendable efforts on helping to improve the lives of the indigenous communities. Who decides what the level of integration the Amerindians need? Is it community driven or is it government driven?
It's community driven. It's people's driven. Actually, all our interaction as a government with the indigenous population, everything has to be approved at the village level. And so, if we have to support any developmental work in our indigenous villages, that happens through a consultation from the bottom. For example, our government has an Amerindian Development Fund, which annually monies are allocated to development, and we fund the request that comes from the villages. So integration by itself also is natural by the people. There's no forcing of integration into the indigenous psyche or into indigenous environment. In fact, with development, indigenous people are developing at a pace that they are choosing, and way ahead of their time also. We have demands for all the developmental amenities that we can find in across the international community, because there's a lot of things happening. They're educated, they have the same desire of any national. They want good roads, they want good housing, They want access to education, to better health care. So all of that may appear as though their lives are changing, but it's a natural progression of development that has been taking place. Our government, for example, is affording support for agriculture in Amerindian communities. Last year and this year, we have invested in more than last year $448 million to provide agricultural machinery to support agriculture in the indigenous communities, because they too need to to have food security. They too need to join the markets for producing food to feed not only Guyana, but the national trust of Guyana being the food basket for the region or internationally. So we have been investing in agriculture so that they can move ahead. They too must enjoy the benefits of technology. We're introducing by their demand, and in fact, we're not probably fast enough based on the break in our tenure, but they are demanding almost immediately connectivity. That will bring a lot of opportunities and change the dynamic of village life also. For example, they can study from right into their village at any university that they are awarded through the scholarship. They can market their products to suppliers who may be interested in indigenous production and products through the internet. Medicine and healthcare can be upgraded through the fact of technology, where they can have access to a consultant other than just a practitioner, etc. So the dynamics of the indigenous life will change, and they are accepting, they are requesting that these changes be made, notwithstanding that they too are developing culturally. We have not forgotten that we should support their protection of their culture. And it was way back in 1992 that we declared a month of celebration of the contribution and the heritage of indigenous people. And today that celebration has become a very significant activity on the tourism calendar also. But for the indigenous people, it's a full recognition that in our country they are recognized, their culture is accepted. And if you have an experience of the celebration, which is held from September, the entire month of September, you will see what I'm talking about. Those who have just probably 1% of Amerindian heritage in them becomes a full-blown Amerindian over that month. And those who have not even a single percent also becomes Amerindian during the celebration. And so the integration for me is something that have brought out quite a lot of positive. In fact, many Guyanese are now recognizing that the Amerindian population is not backward, or we're not confined as the children of the forest any longer, and that we can compete at any level, whether it's at the leadership level, whether it's at the professional level. We can compete with any other Guyanese, and that is positive. In terms of housing, I recalled Dr. Tara mentioning about housing. Our government is supporting the improvement of homes for various communities. It's a project started sometime in 2013 with support from the Inter-American Development Bank and the Ministry of Housing and Water. And we are continuing that also in this new period of our tenure. And recently, our president has even strengthened that proposal to ensure that the hinterland community also enjoy good housing. If you're going to be enjoying good water supply, more safe and pure water supply by the extension of potable water being available in the hinterland now, because there's an aggressive movement by the Ministry of Housing and Water to ensure that safe supply of water is available to indigenous population. If you're going to improve the health system, the education system, by progression, you have to improve housing too. And soon it will become cumbersome, I suppose, whereby reaping of the forest for building homes as the population expand and villages clamor for better housing materials, even though it's traditional to build with the leaves and wood. Today, many villages have transformed into housing that can be compared to those on the coast. For example, there's a village in the North Pacaraimos called the Paramakatoy. When you're flying over, you can hardly find a thatch roof home now. It's fully building materials that is customary and standard internationally.
I just want to clarify. I just want to clarify something you said. Amerindians are indeed Guyanese. Right?
They are
Yeah,
Guyanese.
right. And I also want to follow up also on the culture issue, because you spoke about languages being documented and trying to preserve. What about the culture, the music, and the medicine that need to be documented and preserved? Are there any programs going on in these areas?
Um, I can tell you what has happened since I've been a minister in 2008 on to 2015. We have paid a lot of attention to trying to develop cultural groups in the villages. And that initiative spearheaded quite a lot of activities in developing and being proud to know how to dance the indigenous music and indigenous dances. And they are the villages that speak Makushi and Wapichana. They are also singing in their own languages. The Arikuna, the Patamuna are also, they can sing in their own language. So yes, culture is a big thing for us, and that is why every month our government invests more than $150 million in ensuring that the month of September is is um, is kept as a big, huge intervention to highlight, to share, to develop the culture, the music, the dances, the cuisine, the products of the Amerindians, the sculpture, the paintings, the artists, the individual, customary things that and traditional practices are showcased by every village during the month of September. And we have a huge 1 week extravaganza of music and dances, food, products, and exhibition held in the city.
Mhm.
So yes, we see culture as an integral part and identity of our Amerindian people. And as a government, we have been ensuring that that too is not left out of the equation.
Right.
One last question. Are Amerindians consulted and compensated for mining and logging concessions?
If they're consulted, the law, there's an Amerindian Act, which I know we'll have to at some point in time come back to speak much more on our Amerindian development and challenges. But again, Guyana is like the first. We had the first piece of legislation that provides special rights to Amerindians, and it's called the Amerindian Act number 6 of 2006. In that, they have a full outline of how the government, investor, and GGMC and the Amerindians will exchange or dialogue or negotiate as it relates to forestry, as it relates to mining. The forest belongs fully to the Amerindians. So if within the Amerindian village there are forest tracts of forest that belongs to them, they make their decision forthright as it relates to logging, etc. In terms of mining, it is acceptable. It's international acceptable that the minerals and uh, special stones and all the other things that are under the earth belongs to the state. So the law allows for the state, for the commission, for the investor, and for the Amerindians to have a collaborative approach on what happens in an Amerindian village. If the mining has to take place, medium scale, it cannot take place unless the miner seeks the permission from the village council and the people. It is the people that have to give the approval for mining to take place. But albeit Amerindians are miners themselves, and there are a few communities that are located in the mining district where Amerindians are the chief, or not the chief, but the primary miners, the one that is investing, whether it's at the medium scale, or whether it's at a small scale, or the artisanal mining, where they just use the traditional way of looking for gold and mining for gold. And so anyone wanting to mine for gold may receive a mining license from the GGMC, but that does not give them the authority to mine in an Amerindian village without the permission and approval of the people of that village. So
All right,
you
thank you,
Thank you.
Honorable Minister. We might have to. And has a last question to ask.
Actually, I have several questions, but at this time,
Hi.
I must comment on your housing project. Actually, I'm from Iconi, and as a young boy, I used to visit St. Francis Mission and now Morocco. And in those days, all the houses were attached and made out of water. Nowadays, the last visit I went 2 years ago, there was no thatch houses there. So it's a massive improvement. What I want to ask you about is the craft. Amerindians are noted for the craft, canoe making, hammock making, basket, etc. And more so, their work with straw craft. Could you all comment on what has been done to improve these Amerindian craft?
Well,
And
craft-
let me give you another question, if you can be able to answer it too. What is done to help improve tourism within the Amerindian community? I mean, there's a lot of things to learn. Even Guyanese can learn a lot from the Amerindian communities, and much so foreigners. What is being done through the ministry to enhance tourism within the Amerindian communities?
In terms of craft, that has been very fortunate. Many of the Amerindian villages have retained many of the craft making techniques and skills and expertise. And in terms of marketing, over the last 2 years, or over the last couple of years, there's been a downturn, especially during the pandemic. Our ministry has a craft store or a craft office and shop where we take off a lot of the craft coming from various Amerindian communities. And so we help to market that through our craft shop. But some of the Amerindian crafters, or those who make craft, had very lucrative connection with overseas market. But like I said, over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of downturn, and as the pandemic came on, it even became more pronounced. We will have to again work to connect them to markets, and that has a link to tourism. Our government has traditionally supported tourism. That's one of the key pillars that is expected to move our country, and Amerindians will not be left behind. Currently, we have support for tourism projects in a number of communities in Kopinang, in Monkey Mountain, in Kapui, Mainstay, even Marikabai, from since we returned, receive support for their new resort that they have. I don't know when last you came to Marikabai, but last year, have you stayed at the
No,
new
we stayed at the
resort?
guest house. We stayed at the guest
Oh, you
house.
stayed at the guest house, but there's a very high end, I would want to say, resort in Marikabai now, and they have about maybe 4 or 5 rooms, and it's away from the central location of where the population live. Yes, our government is pushing ahead with community tourism, and the Amerindians have been supported. This year, we have in excess of maybe about $42 million towards tourism. But that is only what our ministry has been supporting. The Ministry of Tourism has been carrying out training and also supporting the tourist initiative of those that were traditionally tourist villages, and they're venturing out to more newer areas that have great potential for tourism in the hinterland and also on the coast. So we do have a program to support tourism. In the big picture, many that's the type of tourism that is going to attract first world countries, where you can have a rustic view, a village life, um, culture, local food, and of course, great scenic opportunities, rich forests, flora, fauna, and yes, that's going to be a big thing in the near future.
Wow.
Yeah, thank you very much, Honorable Minister. Pass you on now to our host.
Well, uh, um, Minister, I can listen to you. I can continue listening to you probably for another 2 hours. You're very knowledgeable about the Amerindian community and what your job is as minister, rightfully. We heard tonight about the PPP support to our Amerindian brothers and sisters, and I'm very proud to hear all the progress that we've made in terms of education, preserving the culture, preserving the craft, and also Amerindians being more in the public sector, holding very important positions. That makes me very proud to be a Guyanese, and I'm happy that we can make progress the way it is right now. And so I want to thank you for being here. I look forward to having you again on the Guyana Dialogue, and I can't wait to be there in September, and I hope that I can be part of these celebrations that's happening. And thank you so much for being here this evening, and we look forward to seeing you very
I think
soon.
I'll make a concluding.
Is there anything you would like to say before we leave here this evening?
Well, I would like to say that, like Guyana, which is transitioning into a more prosperous nation, the indigenous people has a bright future also under our government. And lastly, I want to point out that since 1992, the prominence of Amerindian was being led by our government. And if you look around, foreign affairs. We had a foreign affairs minister who was Amerindian, and even that has now transitioned even to having the permanent representative to the United Nations is an Amerindian. That is, and we're only 10% of the population. We also um, quickly, we also participate at the parliamentary level. And that, for me, is where the indigenous drive is, when you can be part of decision making at the country level, at the national level. It gives you scope for ensuring that indigenous people or Amerindians will never be left behind.
Very well said. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Minister. We have to get you here on another occasion.
Yes,
We
and
have to
thank you to
continue this
our
conversation.
I'm pleased to avail myself, because I believe we have not touched on many of the
I
new
know. I have a number of
initiatives
questions I want to
Yeah,
ask.
that our
yeah,
government is pursuing.
yeah.
And I want to thank our panel this evening, Dr. Tara, Mr. Kublal, and Professor Budu for being here this evening. Have a good
Thank you.
evening, everyone, and to our
Good
viewers.
evening.
Have a good
Thank you.
evening.
Bye
Take
bye.
care.